In my book, Confessions of a Former Fox News Christian, did a whole chapter about right-wing radio, Rush Limbaugh, Michael Savage, Glenn Beck, etc. And I referenced a documentary by Jen Senko. It's called The Brainwashing of My Dad. It's a fascinating story. I reached out to Jen Senko to see if she would join me, and she's been kind enough to be on the broadcast. Hi, Jen. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Seth. It's nice to be here.
Well, I guess let's start with your background. You are a documentary filmmaker. That's correct?
Yes.
And give me like a resume real fast, the types of work that you've done before The Brainwashing of My Dad.
Sure. Well, I started out as an artist and a painter, but then I felt like I wanted to reach a wider audience, and I just started making films, but they were also always socio-political. So the first one was Roadmap Warrior Women, about really independent women that I met out west. And then the second was I co-directed with Fiore DeRosa, called The Vanishing City, about the luxurification of New York City, but also how it's happening throughout the world. And cities were becoming less affordable. And right now I'm writing a book, also called The Brainwashing of My Dad. It got picked up by Source Books. So that's it. I can always tell you more. Like,
well, I mean, let's go back to your dad. You didn't grow up in this sort of right-wing. I mean, I know Limbaugh started back in the 80s, but I mean, you didn't come from that sort of hardcore conservatism?
No, not at all. My parents were what I guess I would describe as very liberal and very open-minded. They were Kennedy Democrats, and they were also like FDR Democrats. They came from the Depression, so FDR to them was a hero who pulled them out of the Depression. They had both remembered Hoover and felt like he didn't do anything. But they were really enthusiastic about Kennedy, and I think they were quite devastated when he was assassinated. But yeah, they were. I would actually almost describe them as hippies before hippies. They were very open-minded. My dad especially loved talking to all different kinds of people, very non-judgmental. As you probably saw in the film, one time, and this is in the 60s, we came out of Port Authority. We were visiting New York for the day, and there was a black homeless man, and he asked my dad for some money. My dad called him sir, had a conversation with him, and, gave him like a couple coins or two. But, so that kind of thing made an impression on me that, accept all people. And, they weren't very judgmental. That'll change later.
Okay, so how did he become introduced to Limbaugh? How did that happen?
Okay, so this is like what I consider the typical American story now, unfortunately. I've had thousands of people write to me telling me, oh, this happened to me, this happened to me. I'm no longer surprised by it.
They just drummed into her what they wanted her to hear. She's a completely different person.
My brother became very fact-resistant.
My reaction was, who are you and what have you done with my stepfather?
Disjointed existence.
And he was completely changed. He was bitter and angry.
At one point, he threatened to get a bus because
he became
challenging.
Obsessed.
And she had never been like that.
He was carrying a small pistol.
She was not hateful.
Shot twice into the
Broke my heart to see my parents.
Very loving and caring.
I feel I don't really know these people anymore.
Just goes on these tirades that
Fundamentally
I spoke with each one and found we all had one thing in common. Someone close to us became enraged and unreachable after excessively listening to or watching right-wing media. How did this happen?
What happened is it was in the 80s, and the country was becoming more conservative for many reasons. But my dad, semi-retired but got a part-time job with a very long commute to work. And he used to have a carpool with like a bunch of guys. So he wasn't that into music. So he tuned to talk radio because he always wanted to learn. And I think he thought he could learn from talk radio. And it was Bob Grant at the time. Bob Grant was, they called him the father of conservative radio. He was like combat radio, called combat radio. And all the big guys, Rush Limbaugh and Hannity and Savage, they learned from him. So that's how he got hooked. That was the gateway drug. And then when he fully retired, he started listening to Rush Limbaugh. And he would listen to him for all of the 3 hours a day, every day. And he was very fanatic about you couldn't interrupt him when he had Rush Limbaugh, and God forbid.
Like you listen to it and you start to vibrate, right? They charge you up, and before you know it, you're frothing at the mouth, and you've got this narrative, which we are seeing a lot of now. That they're coming for you, man. They're coming. They're out there. The other is going to take away everything that you hold dear.
Right.
And right-wing radio, they're masterful at stoking the fears of their listeners. That's probably a great marketing mechanism, right?
Oh, it absolutely is.
Language is not neutral. In politics, it's anything but neutral. This became professionalized in 1994 when Newt Gingrich hired Frank Luntz.
Frank is the genius right-wing wordsmith who taught Republicans to, instead of saying estate tax, say death tax.
So you have managed to shift popular opinion on a lot of unpopular everyday concepts like inherited wealth by labeling it death tax.
I have fought over the validity of the death tax since I started working in this space. And I went out and tested it, and my God, it changed the dynamic of how people looked at policy.
Instead of saying poor people, say the takers. Did I say don't tax rich people? I meant encourage the job creators. What's the difference between drilling for oil and energy exploration? Nothing, except one sounds like something assholes do and one sounds like Indiana Jones. Did I say don't let black people vote? I meant clamp down on voter fraud. Healthcare reform, everyone likes that. Government takeover of healthcare.
So I asked them, which frightens you more, government control or government takeover? Oh, clearly government takeover. Well, I think it was 27 out of 30. That's it.
Once the word is decided on, every single Republican, from the presidential contenders on down to the feces throwers on hate radio, all chant it like Rain Man over and over until it's beaten into our skull.
They studied from the greats, Goebbels, what's his name? Bernays, Edward Bernays. And they made it a point to learn. And then also Frank Luntz, they had him design language for them to disparage Democrats and liberals. Yeah, so they're very, very good at it.
I'm interested in how that's happening now, not to digress too much, but with the QAnon stuff, right? Yeah. I mean, it's not just that we Democrats or liberals or humanists, whatever we want to call us, non-Christians or non-evangelicals. It's not that we just have a difference of opinion. We have perhaps a different philosophy. It's that we are in league with Lucifer. In fact, we may be pedophiles. I mean, this weird demonization, because if we are demons, then it's easier for them to excuse aligning with these awful powers on the extreme right? I mean, we are the other, so all other bets are off.
Yeah, right. They make the other so evil and so bad that we become the enemy. Anybody who's not like them has become like the enemy, and that's how my father was reacting. You know, in the 90s and the 2000s, like we were suddenly the enemy, you know.
Jen, did your dad consider himself a man of faith? I know Rush Limbaugh, it's laughable to think that he's any kind of devout believer. I'd like to quiz the guy on his own Bible knowledge, etc. But he loves to play the Christianity and Christian nation card. Did your dad hold to that kind of evangelical America narrative at all?
No, we were raised Catholic. My dad sang in the choir, and I don't know if I should say this, but after I had a priest get kind of fresh with me when I was in confession, like verbally, we all stopped going to church. And then I think he became kind of agnostic. I think one time he even said he didn't believe in God, but he still was concerned about other religions taking over Christianity. It just didn't make any sense.
And is that like the Muslims are coming? I mean, because I've heard a lot of that among the Rush Limbaugh audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, of all the religions we're scared of, we're terrified of Muslims. Was there any of that?
Well, actually, because this started before we became afraid of Muslims. He sent us emails that liberals are trying to take off "In God We Trust" off of the penny. Liberals hate Christmas, which is so not true.
Stupid. Yeah, it's just stupid. Yeah.
I mean, I live in the land of liberals, and we love Christmas. We do Christmas up big, almost as big as Halloween.
Christmas in New York, yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, so it was more like that liberals were trying to, like, kill Christianity.
Branding is about creating an image that will stick in the mind. Whether that image created is accurate or not doesn't matter. Democrats, liberals, and progressives are branded as big government spenders, dishonest, America-hating elitists who are all atheists who hate Christmas and are soft on crime and weak on defense. They've branded the media as liberal, so much so that it's taken for granted that it's true.
One catchphrase that I hear over and over again is liberal media. Did you hear your dad?
All the time. I heard him use the term liberal media all the time. He'd be like, oh, you can't listen to liberal media. As if there was no such thing as the conservative media.
If you analyze news coverage, as FAIR has done, you find that the news tilts a little bit to the right. It's sort of center-right. Republicans usually outnumber Democrats. It's just pure math. And then people say, well, why do so many people believe the liberal media myth? If you keep handing opinion-shaping power to right-wingers who don't have evidence to yell about, oh, liberals, the liberals, the liberals, the liberals who dominate, well, it's going to have some traction.
The liberal media. Liberal media. Liberal bias.
Liberal media, folks.
Liberal press.
It is the liberal media.
You're seeing then a transformation in the personality of your father.
Right.
Let's talk about those early signs. You're watching, you're the observer, and you think, hey, there's a guy who used to be pretty xenophilic, and he used to be kind of a humanist, and he was accepting, and he embraced diversity, and even the diversity of ideas. And all of a sudden, what started to happen?
Well, first, like when he started listening to Bob Grant, he just started getting crankier. I don't know how to describe it other than that, like just crankier. Not so happy. And then when he got hooked on Rush Limbaugh, he just was always in a rage. Like anything could tick him off. You know, you say something like, oh, the weather is, it's warm. It shouldn't be so warm. Oh, that damn, global warming can I say?
Yeah, knock yourself out. Yeah.
Shit, he just became unreasonable and angry all the time and evangelical about his new beliefs, like trying to convert us, sending us, like when email came in, just sending us all these crazy emails, anti-Clinton emails and anti-Christian or liberal, anti-democratic emails. So yeah, his personality totally changed. It's like you're looking at him like, okay, this looks like my dad, but what have you done with him? Where's my dad? He totally changed.
I wrote in Confessions about this statistical reality, this trend, probably a better word, that those types of conservatives tend to get their news about the world more from a single news source, which would be Fox News for them, and right-wing radio, right? Where those who are not those types of evangelical conservatives are statistically trending toward getting their information about the world from a wider variety of sources. They sort of sample more at the buffet of information to determine what the facts are. Now, we're all tribal, we're all guilty of bias, etc., but there is a trend for people like your dad at that time in his life to sort of jump into this narrow conduit, and that conduit becomes his world. Was that your observation?
Oh, absolutely. It got to the point where, my parents used to always watch the news together. That was what they did at dinner time, and after dinner, they no longer did that because Fox wasn't acceptable to my mother. And it was to my dad. So he kind of closed himself off and just dove into, sunk himself into this right-wing ecosystem. Only, any other media aside from that. It was kind of, actually, being raised Catholic, it kind of reminded me of that, because as a Catholic, you're told don't go to any other church because this is the only true one. If you go to another church, it's a sin. And so you can't even become exposed to other religions or what their views might be. So it was kind of the same with this. It's like it made him closed off, and he got in this bubble, which is really typical for, the I don't even like to say conservatives because they're no longer conservative. They're radical.
Yeah, there's zealots.
Radical right of today.
Yeah. So have you noticed that the Fox News types, they talk about the mainstream media, and this is a pejorative, right? The mainstream media, they're brainwashing you. Meanwhile, Fox has enjoyed ratings dominance and a type of power and influence that makes them so much stronger than many of their competitors combined. It's ironic that they're talking about the, quote, mainstream news when they are number one on the dial, right?
But that's a good point. It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
The most dangerous thing about Fox News is not the fact that it exists and speaks to its audience of a few million people. It's the effect that Fox can have on the rest of the media. Time and again, you will see a false and wrong story that is aired and starts moving through the Fox News channel on a given day, and it bleeding over, spilling over into mainstream institutions of journalism. Media critics coin this term, Fox effect, to mean media is an ecosystem and all media affects other media. And so the existence of Fox News and having that wrong approach to journalism out there has a toxic effect in the rest of journalism.
These are areas which even the government officials have said, these are no-go zones. You don't go in them if you're not a Muslim. There's no law enforcement other than what's enforced by the Muslim communities there.
The French government has created an environment in these certain neighborhoods where they don't allow local law enforcement to come in. There's these no-go zones in France.
And they become then recruiting grounds. They become a sort of festering region where Islamic extremism can thrive.
Right, so now this extremism could grow in that environment.
So they air the stories, and then they start to bang the drums that the mainstream media is censoring and won't report, to try to pressure and guilt the mainstream media into following their lead.
When I was at Fox News, I can remember sitting in the green room before a show was taped, and a particularly biased segment comes on, and then someone in the green room where we're all waiting, these include Fox News producers, Fox News staff, Fox News contributors, someone will say, wow, that was really fair and balanced, and the whole place erupts in laughter.
So your father then was ostracized from his wife? I mean, did she disconnect? He's changing. He's becoming more toxic. It's obvious they're starting to rub each other the wrong way. I mean, I don't want to get too personal. You just decide what you're comfortable with. But how's that working?
I mean, actually, I was really startled when I think she was in her 80s. She sent me an email saying, you got to help me find an apartment. I can't take this. They used to argue a lot, but then eventually they kind of developed this sort of understanding, like not to talk about it, but they sat opposite each other, their backs to backs in their den, their office, and would shoot like emails back and forth. My dad would shoot us all an email that had some outlandish claim, like if you go back to Clinton, they killed Vince Foster or something. My mother would started learning how to source, check sources, and she would send something back that debunked it. Then they'd get up and not say anything. But my dad did take it a step further, because the friend that his Rush Limbaugh buddy, they were like in love with Rush Limbaugh. They were like two schoolgirls. Like they would get together at McDonald's before YMCA and go, did you hear what Rush said last night? And so he is the one that had introduced my dad to Fox. And but not only that, he said, hey, Frank, if you get some earbuds, you can listen to all these other right-wing talkers, and you don't have to listen to any of that other stuff. My dad became hard of hearing because he always was listening to them, and he'd play them loud in the bedroom, my parents' bedroom. My mother would say, I can't sleep, Frank, because you're playing this stuff, and you've gone to sleep, and still I can hear it. Anyway, he moved into another bedroom. So, yeah, it wasn't that great for their marriage.
How about your relationship? You and your dad?
Not good. It wasn't good. He actually almost disowned me once. I think I was on a dating site, and because I had gotten such a bad opinion of what Republicans were, I never thought it. I wouldn't have ever thought of anything of it before. I just said, no Republicans, please. And somehow, probably through my mom, it got back to him. And he called up and left a message on my machine back then. It wasn't voicemail. Don't ever call me again to ask me for anything, any of my opinions. You're not listening. You're not taking my opinion. And as you should, like, because he became sexist too, him being the male, like I should listen to him. So yeah, it was really strange.
So now you are seeing the divisions. What inspired you to then begin to chronicle all of what's happening? Did you, at the beginning, think, I'm going to make a movie? I mean, what's going on in your skull?
Honestly, I was like, this is really dangerous for America. If they can do this to my dad, and then they started doing it to, it's like, it happened to a friend of mine, and then another friend of mine. And I'm like, there must be tons more people that are getting this message than my dad. And I'm like, I have to document this somehow. I have this thing, like, I want to save the world.
Yeah, we're crusaders. I think we have that in common. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I didn't have the confidence at first, but then after I did the second film, The Vanishing City, I just kind of knew, like, I had to do it. If it was the last thing I did, and it almost became the last thing I did, I got pneumonia, I got shingles. Because when I work, and as I'm sure you do too, you just throw yourself into it 100%. So
stress levels are high and your level of commitment's through the roof. You're not sleeping. You probably don't have any downtime. What's his disposition to having cameras and stuff around at that time? I mean, they feel like a science fair experiment or what?
What did he feel?
Yeah.
Oh, he loved it. he just thought he was so interesting and fabulous. And he was used to me going around with a camera. And the camera that I had was really quite small. It was a good camera, but it didn't look like a behemoth. And when I would have a friend, another camera person come, a shooter, I call them, another shooter come, like there were women, and he just wasn't intimidated. And it just became like wallpaper. He just got used to it.
Like a reality show thing.
Yeah, he just didn't. A couple of times he minded. He'd be like, when he was eating or something, like you almost see that in the film. Like he's like, what are you shooting me for? I mean, go away. But other times he just seemed to not notice it or.
But I mean, he has to know that you're shooting kind of an expose. I mean, this is not a positive profile. You're trying to, sound an alarm bell. This didn't concern him at all?
Yeah, no, but see, he got to explain his point of view.
I see.
And I wasn't arguing with him. I wasn't judging him. As far as he knew, he was convincing me.
So the story has a compelling ending, and I'm going to not give it away here. In fact, I'm going to encourage people to go to watch the film so they can see kind of what happens next. What's the best way for people to watch this?
You mean what platform?
Yeah, where would they find it?
Well, if they go to the website, The Brainwashing of My Dad, they'll see a list of wherever it streams. But iTunes right now is running an election special, and they're good. They're always good to watch it on. But it's on all sorts of other streaming platforms as
So if they just go to your website, thebrainwashingofmydad.com. I'm on the website now. You've got actually profiles of the production team and kind of some background on the piece, etc. Right?
Yeah. And if people would rather, sorry about the frog. I don't know what happened.
As long as it's not COVID, we're in a good place. Okay, Jen? So
this just happens. I can never predict when it's going to happen.
You're fine. You're fine.
But if they want a DVD, they can email me, and I can send them a DVD if they'd rather have a DVD.
Jen, we just gave away our ages. You know what I'm saying?
I know. Jeez. I know.
You want a VHS copy? You want it on Betamax? I mean, we can get you a copy. Just call. We'll take care of you. I'm at this weird point. Maybe you're there. I feel it's a sense of cultural fatigue over all the divisions. And I feel this sense of real despair about how eager people are to divide and hate, to sort of refuse other people a seat at the human table. Does that resonate with you? Do you go to bed at night and look at the ceiling and just think, God, how are we going to get out of this? What's wrong with people? Does that go on in your skull?
Yeah, except I don't look at the ceiling because I'm too nearsighted to see it.
You look at the blurry place where the ceiling would be. Okay, all right.
But, yeah, I mean, it really deeply disturbs me, to be honest with you. I try not to get too depressed and forlorn. I think what happened to our country and what's going to happen, I'm truly frightened. And I mean, I feel like when I made this movie, I was like running around with my hair on fire, and I just wanted people to listen. But I think it's very typical for Americans, maybe for humans, to not pay attention to something until that water is boiling for the frog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's boiling in the pot.
It's funny. Back to Rush Limbaugh.
Mm-hmm.
He listed, and this is still on his website, the 4 corners of deceit. And he listed science as one of the corners of deceit. Meaning there's an entire culture that's sort of fed by the Limbaugh right-wing radio conduit, the Fox News conduit. They are primed to distrust science and scientists, which brings us into this whole existential thing. We're talking not just about climate change, but what about COVID, a global pandemic? You've got people who are, they're screaming freedom with their placards and banners and throwing their masks in the air and coughing on other people. I mean, oh my God, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so harmful. It's so destructive. How do we come back from this?
We all go to your house. Let all the rationalists go to Jen Senko's place. We'll all just hang there until it all blows over. We'll make our own nation, the United States of Senko. And we'll put your face on the currency. I'm just being facetious. I don't know what the solution is either. I think humor is all we have left, right? But we don't give up. And that's why I so appreciate you and your activism. I appreciate the fact that you're part of this conversation. We really do think that a world where love conquers hate is a much better world, and it's a world worth fighting for. Any final thoughts on the film? Anything you'd like to say about the brainwashing of my dad before we call it a day?
I'm looking forward to the book being done and the book coming out. I hope it's not too late. But I hope if it is, it can shed some light on what's happened and why. The book is going to be like a much fuller version of the movie. It goes into a lot more detail and a lot more of the history and shows how we've been bamboozled. And basically, that's what I call the last few decades, the period of the Great Bamboozle.
The Great Bamboozling. Did I get that right? The Great Bamboozle?
Great Bamboozle, the period of the Great Bamboozle. That's what I call it.
Jen Senko, I'm going to link to your book, website rather, the film. The book's coming out when? Is that next year? Is that this year?
They haven't told me when it's going to come out. Originally, it was supposed to come out in September before the election.
Yeah.
But because of COVID, everything went back.
Yeah.
We're finishing up. We'll be finishing it in November, but I imagine that maybe it won't come out until Christmas or 2021.
We'll watch the website. We'll check it out. In the meantime, the film is on iTunes, or just go to thebrainwashingofmydad.com for all the details. And we'll keep it kicking, if you will, Jen Senko. We'll keep trying to promote love over hate, unity over division, and try to, set the better example. And I so appreciate your documentary and your time here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate what you do too, Seth.